Have you ever seen someone treated as if they were invisible? An old man, not angry, not protesting, just standing there and making the entire U.S. military base bow its head. Today's story is true, and it will make you speechless. You are watching Untold Veteran Story, where forgotten stories are told with all your heart. Let me know where you are watching from, and if you believe that honor never expires, please like and subscribe. Part 1. The Forgotten Appearance. The morning was too quiet for a place like Fort Grantham. The rising sun cast long, thin shadows across the main road, and the flag above the gate blew gently in the whispering autumn breeze. On any other day, everything would have been normal. Soldiers arriving, patrols rotating, boots crunching on gravel, and a clear voice on the radio. But this was no ordinary morning. It was Veterans Day. He appeared from the far end of the parking lot, an old man, moving slowly but deliberately, as if each step knew exactly where it belonged. His name was Leonard Hayes, though no one at the gate knew that yet. 84 years old, his back was still straight, and his gait, though tempered by time, carried a quiet defiance. He wore polished brown loafers, khakis, a shirt tucked neatly into a wool coat, and on his head a faded brown felt hat that looked as if it had seen more years of service than the soldiers standing guard that day. In his right hand he held a cane, not for crutch, but for rhythm and grace. In his left he held an old envelope, tattered by the corners, sealed but clearly treasured. He approached the security checkpoint with a calm confidence. At first, the young soldiers inside barely noticed him. They were busy with morning gossip, cups of coffee in hand, giggling about something on their phones. When Leonard stepped forward and greeted them with a light good morning, handing them his ID, they paused, not out of respect, but out of confusion. The lieutenant on duty, Mason Rusk, no more than 28, held the card between his fingers, glanced at it, and scoffed. "Sir," he said, raising an eyebrow, "this thing expired before I was born." The other soldiers chuckled. One of them leaned out of the booth, looked Leonard up and down, and muttered, "Did you just get off a movie set or something?" Rusk held up the ID card as if it were a joke and showed it to the others. "I mean, come on, it looks like something you'd find in a Reagan-era cereal box." Leonard didn't react. He didn't laugh, didn't flinch. He simply held out his hand again, waiting for the card. The envelope under his arm was still pressed tightly against his hip. "Try the museum down the street," Rusk said, handing the card back with a smirk. "They like stories like yours." Without a word, Leonard nodded once, turned, and began walking. He didn't protest, didn't look back, didn't even sigh. His silence was sharper than any reprimand. The only sound was the light tapping of his cane on the concrete. When he reached the edge of the parking lot, he found a bench under an old oak tree. He sat down slowly, folded his hat in his lap, and looked straight ahead, his eyes fixed on something beyond the base gate. Back at the booth, the laughter resumed. The guards mimicked his gait, one of them even leaning on a pen like a cane, staggering dramatically. Rusk tossed Leonard's card into a tray marked invalid, chuckling to himself. "That guy probably thought he taught Chuck Norris how to fight," someone said, and the laughter rang out. But one guard didn't laugh. Private Jacob Perez had watched the entire exchange in silence. He hadn't moved, hadn't said anything, but now he shifted slightly his gaze still fixed on the figure under the tree. There was something wrong with the man, not because he doubted it, but because it felt too familiar, too real. Jacob's grandfather had served in Korea. He rarely spoke of it, but the few times he did, his voice dropped an octave, his eyes darkened, his hands shook. The silences that followed those moments lasted longer than the stories. Leonard Hayes had that silence too, that same gravity, and Jacob, standing behind the glass and the protocol, could sense it. Something was wrong, or maybe something had been terribly, irretrievably missed. By the time Leonard sat beneath the thinning branches of the oak tree, sunlight had begun slipping through in narrow beams, casting a warm glow on the brown hat resting gently in his lap. He didn't lower his head. He didn't look around. His eyes were fixed on a distance only he could see, somewhere far beyond the gates of Fort Grantham. Back at the checkpoint booth, the air had changed. Laughter filled the space again, but not the kind that heals. This time it stung. "Did you see that guy?" Rusk chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Khakis, loafers, and a war story. He looked like he got lost between a church picnic and a Civil War reenactment." Private Shaw walked in, sipping from a soda can, eyebrows raised. "Was that the guy with the cane? I thought he was here to fix the plumbing." More laughter erupted. Someone mimicked the old man's slow gait, dragging one leg, while leaning on an imaginary cane. Another guard added, "Maybe he's writing a memoir. How I pretended to be a war hero on Veterans Day." That line brought the house down. The booth shook with the weight of their amusement. Rusk, still proud of his handling of the situation, continued retelling the moment like a personal highlight reel. "He looked me right in the eye, like I was supposed to salute him or something." Another voice piped in, "Yeah, like he's some kind of secret general undercover." They laughed, they mocked, they basked in it, except for one. Private Jacob Paris stood quietly in the back corner, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm coffee cup. He didn't join in. He didn't even look at them. His eyes remained locked on the window, where Leonard still sat beneath the tree and moved, untouched, as though none of the noise behind him mattered. But something about him demanded attention. Jacob took a deep breath. His mind drifted to his grandfather, a Korean War vet who rarely spoke of the past. On the rare nights when he did, his voice would drop, his hands would still, and the weight of those stories would settle like smoke in the room. Leonard Hayes carried that same stillness, that same uncheckable gravity, and Jacob felt it. The morning sun now caught the top of Leonard's cane, and that's when Jacob saw it etched faintly into the polished wood. The Marine Corps' emblem, not a souvenir, not something bought from a gift shop, real, military issue. A quiet weight dropped in Jacob's chest, heavy, sharp, undeniable. "Something's not right," he murmured. "Say what?" Rusk called out, still chuckling. Jacob didn't answer. He set his coffee down and pulled out his phone. A name lit up in his contacts. Jordan. Logistics officer, Arlington. He typed quickly, keeping it brief. "Need a quiet favor." Name, Leonard Hayes, possibly Marine Corps, high rank, Vietnam or earlier. Check quietly. No one noticed. They were still laughing, but Jacob knew deep down that moment wouldn't pass like a punchline, because the real ones, they don't shout, they make you go quiet. Out the sun climbed higher, casting sharper shadows across the gravel lot. The soldiers in the booth had mostly gone back to their routines, phones out, radios humming, banter slowly fading into idle chatter. But Private Jacob Paris hadn't moved from his post by the window. His eyes remained fixed on the old man under the tree, who sat so still it was almost eerie. Leonard Hayes didn't check his phone, didn't sip from a coffee cup, didn't shift to ease his back. He just waited, not passively, but with purpose, like a man who had stood longer in harder places and knew the value of silence. Inside the booth, Jacob's message to his cousin Jordan had been marked as read. Still no reply. He checked again, fingers tapping the screen, nerves prickling like static. He could feel something building, some quiet force that hadn't yet found its voice. Suddenly, the door to the break room opened. Deborah Lane, the mess hall supervisor, stepped in, tying her apron behind her back. She'd been at Fort Grantham longer than most of the lieutenants had been alive. The guards barely looked up as she poured herself a cup of coffee, but when she overheard Rusk retelling the funny old man story for the second time, her hands stilled. He had this envelope, Rusk was saying, chuckling, like some secret agent crap. I thought he was gonna give us his memoirs or something. Deborah turned, voice low. What did he look like? Rusk blinked. Old, black guy, brown hat, walked like he meant something. Hat, she asked again. Her chest tightened. Was it soft felt? Not a baseball cap? Yeah, said another guard, like one of those classic ones. Looked respected, I guess. Just out of place. Deborah set her cup down carefully, wiped her hands on her apron. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, softly, I think I saw him once before. Years ago. The room paused. It was 1982. Explosion at the fuel depot, she said. Everyone ran, except one man. Skinny, older even then, walked right into the smoke, carried out 3 men like they weighed nothing, never said a word, just left. The guards exchanged uncertain glances. The laughter had died. You think that's him? Someone asked. Deborah didn't answer directly. I never caught his name, but I never forgot that face, or that hat. Across the base, Jacob's phone buzzed. Jordan found something. Leonard Hayes, Marine Corps, enlisted 1960, retired. Master Gunnery Sergeant, classified operations clearance, last active service linked to Operation Echo Fire, still redacted. Jacob's stomach turned. There it was, not a myth, not a random old man with stories, a ghost they were never supposed to forget. He turned toward the window again. Leonard hadn't moved, still beneath the tree, still waiting. But now Jacob knew he wasn't waiting for permission. He was waiting to be remembered. The silence didn't arrive all at once. It began as a shift in tone, a sudden stillness after the laughter, a glance exchanged between 2 soldiers who realized something didn't feel right. In the booth, the story of the old man with the envelope had been told, retold, and wrung out for every last drop of amusement. But now, no one seemed to be laughing anymore. Outside, Leonard Hayes remained under the tree and moved like a monument no one had planned for. Inside, Paris stared at his phone, rereading the message from Jordan over and over. Each time the words hit harder. Master Gunnery Sergeant, classified operations, Echo Fire, still redacted. A man with that record didn't just walk onto bases without purpose. He didn't sit in parking lots for show. He carried silence the way others carried rank heavies, solemn, earned. Then the phone on the wall rang. Not the regular line, not a buzz or a chirp. This was a sharp, single chime, longer, heavier. The direct line, red tagged, secure. Everyone in the booth froze. Perez was closest. He reached for the receiver, heart in his throat. "Checkpoint 4, he said, voice steady. "Private Paris speaking." The voice on the other end was cold. "Professional, female. This is Colonel Amelia Rhodes, Department of Special Operations. I need to speak with your commanding officer immediately. Put me on speaker." Paris didn't hesitate. He held up a hand, his eyes meeting Rusk's. "It's for you." Rusk stepped forward, still with that leftover smirk from earlier, but it faded as soon as he heard the voice echo through the room. "Lieutenant Rusk," the colonel said, her tone like a scalpel, "you are currently at the main checkpoint of Fort Grantham. Earlier this morning, you turned away a man named Leonard Hayes. Do you confirm this?" "Yes, ma'am. He had an expired ID, no clearance credentials." There was a pause. "You made a grave mistake." Rusk blinked. "I didn't. You mocked a master gunnery sergeant of the United States Marine Corps," she said. "His record predates your birth. He led multiple Black Ops missions, still classified by four branches of the military. He holds permanent clearance under Directive 117B. That ID, it's not expired. It activates annually. Today, silence fell like a dropped flag. "No one told me," Rusk whispered. "That's the point," the colonel replied. "Men like Hayes don't walk around announcing who they are. They don't need to, but they are to be treated with full honors." Immediately, Perez felt the breath leave his chest. At that moment, headlights swept across the gravel. A black SUV pulled up to the gate. Its windows were tinted. No sirens, just presence. Authority dressed in silence. The front passenger door opened. Out stepped a man in full uniform, polished shoes catching the morning light. Colonel Isaac Greer. He walked with purpose, controlled, measured, but intense like a thunderstorm that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. He didn't stop at the booth. He didn't ask questions. He simply said, "Where is Sergeant Hayes?" Rusk, pale, pointed toward the tree. Colonel Greer nodded once. "Prepare the base," he ordered. "Honor protocol. Full corridor now." No one argued. No one hesitated. Inside the booth, the silence finally shattered, but it wasn't from noise. It was the sound of respect. Returning. It began with whispers. Before the colonel had even reached the tree, the message was already spreading quietly at first, like a secret no one wanted to say too loud. Then faster, urgently, across the base, through barracks and hallways, across training fields and mess halls. "Prepare the corridor. Full honors. Incoming Sergeant Hayes." In less than 15 minutes, Fort Grantham transformed. Recruits who had been half asleep now stood at attention, straightening their uniforms with trembling hands. Kitchen staff dropped aprons, mechanics left tools on the ground, medics paused mid-inventory. The base's loudspeakers didn't say a word, but somehow everyone knew what to do. Along the main road stretching from the checkpoint to the memorial courtyard, the columns began to form. Officers, recruits, veterans, civilians, hundreds standing shoulder to shoulder, eyes forward, hands raised in salute. They weren't saluting a title. They were saluting the man who hadn't asked for it. Colonel Greer reached Leonard under the tree. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, slowly, the old man stood. Greer raised his hand in a precise, unwavering salute. Leonard returned it with quiet calm, his hand steady, a gesture practiced, timeless. Then he tucked the envelope back beneath his arm, adjusted his hat, and began walking. No one escorted him. He didn't need it. He walked alone down the corridor of soldiers, his cane tucked beneath one arm, now refusing help, not out of pride, but tradition. Every step echoed with more than footfall. It carried decades of stories, battles, names, promises. As he passed, not a single soldier moved. They didn't blink, didn't breathe. Some held back tears they couldn't name, because something about him made them feel small in the best way, like standing near a mountain. Rusk was there too, now standing perfectly still, his jaw tight, sweat gathering beneath his collar. He didn't dare speak. Baines stood beside him, her earlier sarcasm drained, replaced by something she hadn't felt since boot camp shame. As Leonard passed them, he didn't look, but Greer did. He turned slightly, just enough for them to hear. "For your information," he said, voice low and cold, "that ID card you laughed at, it carries a passive transmitter, activates once a year on Veterans Day. That's how we know he's still alive." Rusk blinked. You track him, we honor him," Greer corrected quietly, "because Sergeant Hayes never wanted attention, only that we remember the ones who never came back." And with that, Greer turned and walked beside Leonard, matching his pace, silent and reverent. They reached the courtyard. By then the corridor had grown. Hundreds of boots lined the path, uniforms polished, medals pinned, backs straight. Leonard paused at the memorial wall, polished black granite, reflecting the early sun. His reflection met the carved names of men long gone. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He simply knelt, not out of pain, but reverence, one hand resting on the stone, the other holding the envelope like a folded flag. His head bowed, and around him silence. No speeches, no orders, just breathless stillness. And then a single voice broke the hush. "Sergeant Major on deck." A wave swept through the formation. Hundreds of soldiers snapped to attention. Hands raised, hearts tightened. It wasn't about military protocol anymore. It wasn't about chain of command or medals or pay grade. It was something deeper. It was the moment the base remembered who it was built for, and why it still stood. The air around the memorial courtyard felt still, but alive, like every stone, every blade of grass. Every uniformed figure present was holding a breath they didn't know they'd taken. Leonard Hayes remained kneeling, one hand resting gently on the cold granite of the wall, the other clutching a thin, worn envelope. The names on the wall were etched in neat, straight rows, but for Leonard they weren't names. They were voices. They were hands he'd once held, jokes he still remembered, eyes that had once met his across jungle smoke and silent despair. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. After a moment he stood slowly, without help, and placed the envelope gently at the base of the wall. He stepped back, hat still off, eyes locked on the stone. Then, for the first time all morning, he spoke. "I didn't come here for applause," he said, voice steady but low. "I came to deliver these." His hand gestured toward the envelope. "I've written them every year. 38 letters, one for each man who didn't make it back. I told their families who they were, what they did, how they died, what they stood for." He paused, the weight of his own words landing harder than any salute. "I never mailed them," he added. "Didn't think anyone would care." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was sacred. But then Colonel Greer stepped forward. "They did," he said quietly. Leonard blinked, uncertain. Greer nodded. "We found the envelopes every year, hidden behind the wall." Leonard's breath caught. "We never told you. You never asked. But the names and addresses you're handwriting, those were real. So we delivered them." A soft gasp rippled through the soldiers behind them. Leonard's shoulders shifted just slightly. His composure cracked. but not from weakness, from relief, from understanding, from something deeper than either. You delivered them, he repeated. Yes, sir, every one. Some families kept them in frames. Some read them every Veterans Day at dinner. One family built a box and added your letter to a chest of his medals. Said it was the only time they truly understood who he was. Leonard closed his eyes, and for a long time he said nothing, but his lips moved just slightly, whispering names that no one else could hear. When he opened his eyes again, they glistened not with sadness, but with something else, a lifetime of duty finally received. Behind him, Lieutenant Rusk stood still. He had not spoken since the corridor formed. He hadn't dared, but now something pushed him forward. He took one step, then another, until he stood only a few feet from the man he had dismissed just hours earlier. I'm sorry, he said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Leonard looked at him, long and quiet, then gave a small nod. You saw a man, Leonard said, but you didn't see the weight he carried. Rusk swallowed. I see it now. Leonard turned back to the wall, and as he did, the wind shifted soft, lifting slightly through the flags above. For a moment, it almost felt like the names on the wall had exhaled, because they were no longer forgotten. They had been carried, and now they had finally arrived. The ceremony ended, but no one moved, not because they were waiting for orders, but because something sacred had just passed through them. Leonard Hayes didn't need music. He didn't need banners. What he left behind lingered in silence far deeper than anything that could be spoken aloud. As he turned from the memorial wall, Colonel Greer stepped back, letting the old Marine walk alone, not as a gesture of isolation, but of reverence. Everyone else did the same. Leonard walked slowly, the crowd parting like water around him. He nodded at no one. He didn't wave, but his presence pulled every eye like gravity. No salute was required, but everyone gave one. Later that afternoon, the base commander called an unscheduled assembly inside the main hall. More than 200 personnel filled the space, recruits barely out of basic, mechanics in dusty uniforms, officers still stunned by what they had witnessed. The room quieted before anyone stepped up to the podium. Then Leonard appeared. No stage lights, no music, just the sound of footsteps, deliberate, steady, and unmistakable. He held his hat in both hands, his back straight, his voice steady. I'm no hero, he began. His words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. I'm just a man who kept his promises. He scanned the crowd, faces young and wide-eyed, faces guilty and wondering, faces trying to understand what it meant to witness living history. You've been taught that honor comes with rank, ribbons, or recognition, he continued, but real honor, it shows up when no one's looking. It's in how you treat someone who seems like they don't matter, because sometimes they're the only one who does. He paused, letting it sink in. No one interrupted. Then he simply nodded, turned, and walked off stage. There was no thunderous applause, only reverence. Rusk stood in the back, still in uniform, still stiff with everything he hadn't said. As Leonard passed by, Rusk stepped forward. Sergeant Major, he began, I failed you. Leonard looked him in the eye. No, he said, you failed yourself. Rusk straightened. But now you have a choice. Change how you lead or keep pretending the mirror doesn't matter. Rusk's eyes welled. I'll change, sir. Leonard gave a single nod. That was enough. That evening, under the fading light of the setting sun, A small bronze plaque was quietly installed at Fort Grantham main gate. It read, "The Leonard Hayes Gate, in honor of the quiet valor he almost didn't see." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "True honor doesn't expire. It waits to be remembered." There was no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no media, just a few soldiers standing quietly, heads lowered, hands behind their backs, finally aware that they'd witnessed something far more powerful than protocol. And the next year, on the same day, when a black military SUV pulled up to a small gravel driveway outside Briar Ridge, no one needed to knock. Leonard Hayes was already standing on the porch, hat in hand, waiting. Leonard Hayes passed away quietly, just the way he had lived. No alarms, no emergencies, no crowd gathered around. He was found in the early hours of a cool November morning, seated in his favorite chair, blanket over his knees, his brown hat resting neatly on the table beside him. His hands were folded over a simple manila envelope, sealed, hand-labeled in sharp, steady handwriting. It read, "For the ones I couldn't save." There was no funeral announcement, no eulogy, just a flag folded on his bed and a single SUV that arrived at his house the next day, carrying to officers who already knew the way. They stood in silence on the porch, heads bowed, until the door was opened not by a relative, but by time itself. Inside that envelope was one final letter. It wasn't addressed to any one person. It was addressed to every generation that would come after him. "If you're reading this," it began, "then I've finally laid down the weight I carried. Some names I could never forget, some ghosts I never stopped answering to. But this letter is not about regret. It's about reminding you of something simple. Honor does not fade. It gets lost sometimes in pride, in power, and noise, but it is never gone. You don't need a title to walk with dignity. You just need the courage to carry it quietly, especially when no one's watching. I've seen real heroes. Most of them never made it home. The rest never wanted applause, just a promise: don't let their names go silent. We all carry something. Make sure what you carry is worth being remembered." There was no signature, just a line written in thick ink, centered on the bottom of the page. "Justice may arrive late, but it is never absent." The letter was preserved in the base archives. A copy was framed and mounted beside the gate that now bore his name, and every new recruit who passed through Fort Granham's entrance was required to stop just for a minute and read it, not because it was a rule, but because it mattered. Because long after medals rust and ranks are forgotten, the legacy of Leonard Hayes remains not in brass or granite, but in every silent moment when someone does the right thing when no one is looking.